I served exactly 1,096 days behind bars for a lie my parents scripted. They thought I would emerge with nothing but a buried reputation. But the moment those iron gates opened, the balance of power shifted. Tonight, a single hidden drive and a buried medical record are about to make their perfect family image crumble live on camera. My name is Haley Brooks, and for the last 1,096 days, that name has belonged to the Department of Corrections of the state of Colorado. To the world outside these concrete walls, I am a cautionary tale, a disgraced CEO who let ambition rot into criminality. To the guards walking the catwalks above, I am inmate number 49205, a quiet woman who folds her sheets with military precision and never speaks unless spoken to. But to the people who put me here, the people who share my DNA and my last name, I am a loose end they believe they have successfully cauterized. They are wrong. I sat on the edge of my bunk, the thin, scratchy wool of the blanket biting into the skin of my thighs. The air in here always smells the same, a mixture of industrial bleach, damp concrete, and the metallic tang of old plumbing. It is the scent of stagnation. My cell was 6 feet by 8 feet, a stone box designed to crush the spirit. But for me, it had been a chrysalis. I ran my fingers over the wall beside my head. The paint was peeling in jagged flakes, revealing the gray cinder block beneath. Over the last 3 years, I had used a small piece of gravel tracked in from the yard to make tiny, imperceptible marks near the floorboard. One mark for every week of silence. One mark for every time I swallowed a scream and turned it into a plan. Tomorrow, I would walk out. Most women in here spent their final night crying or laughing, vibrating with a manic energy about seeing their children or eating a burger that did not taste like cardboard. I felt nothing but a cold, heavy focus. It was the same focus I used to have when I was 24 years old, sitting in a basement apartment with no windows, coding the architecture for what would become Northcrest Vault. I closed my eyes and let the memory wash over me, not for nostalgia, but for fuel. I remembered the hum of the servers I had bought secondhand from a liquidation sale. I remembered the taste of stale coffee and the ache in my lower back from sitting in a cheap office chair for 18 hours a day. Northcrest Vault was not given to me. It was not an inheritance. It was forged from my own sweat and the sheer refusal to sleep until the encryption protocols were perfect. I built a fortress for data, a system so secure that Fortune 500 companies eventually begged to pay me millions of dollars to protect their secrets. But in the Brooks family, merit was secondary to biology. I opened my eyes and looked at the steel toilet in the corner. My parents did not see a CEO when they looked at me. They saw a placeholder, a steward, someone to keep the seat warm until my younger brother, Gavin, decided he was done playing Playboy and was ready to wear the crown. They called him the heir because he was male. They called me the dutiful daughter because I was useful. And when I became too powerful, when I refused to just hand over the keys to the kingdom I built because Gavin needed a new toy, they decided I was no longer useful. They decided I was a liability. 3 years ago, they sent me here. I stood up and paced the small length of the cell. 3 steps forward, turn, 3 steps back. For 3 years, the visitation logs remained empty by my choice. The requests had come in, persistent and desperate. In the first 6 months, my mother, with her weeping voicemails that my lawyer played for me, my father, with his stern demands to settle matters, even Gavin, probably wearing one of the Italian suits I paid for, wanting to come and see his sister behind glass. I refused them all. I denied every visitation request. I returned every letter unopened. I knew exactly why they wanted to see me. It was not repentance. It was not love. They wanted to come here to gauge me. They wanted to look into my eyes and see if I was broken yet. They wanted to bring documents for me to sign, burying legal clauses under the guise of family reconciliation, trying to strip me of the final 10% of shares I still managed to hold on to through a blind trust. They wanted to take the last crumbs of my life so they could sleep better at night in the mansions my code built. By refusing to see them, I denied them their closure. I denied them the narrative that we were working through this. Silence was the only weapon I had in here, and I wielded it like a knife. A sharp rap on the bars snapped me back to the present. I stopped pacing and turned. It was Officer Miller, a woman with a face carved from granite who had worked the segregation unit for 20 years. She was not kind, but she was fair, which was more than I could say for the judge who sentenced me. "Brooks," Miller said, her voice echoing slightly in the corridor. "Lights out in 20 minutes. You packed?" "Since this morning," I replied. My voice sounded raspy. I spoke so rarely that my vocal cords felt like rusty strings. Miller nodded, her eyes scanning the sparse cell. She lingered for a moment, which was unlike her. Usually, she was a ghost, moving past cells without engaging. Today, she reached into her pocket. "You're out at 0800 hours tomorrow," she said, stepping closer to the bars. "Processing will take 2 hours, then you're on the street." "I know the procedure," I said. "This came for you," Miller said. She slid a small, folded piece of paper through the gap in the bars. "Against protocol to pass notes this late, but seeing as you're gone tomorrow, and you never caused me a day of trouble in 3 years, I'm making an exception." I stared at the paper. It was not official prison stationery. It was a torn page from a standard legal pad. "Who sent it?" I asked, not moving to take it yet. Paranoia was a survival instinct in here. "Didn't come through the mail," Miller said, her voice dropping an octave. "A visitor left it at the front desk, said they knew you wouldn't see them, but asked to have this put in your personal effects for release. I thought you might want to read it before you walk out those doors." I stepped forward and took the paper. My fingers brushed against the cold steel of the bars. Miller turned and walked away, her boots thudding rhythmically against the concrete floor until the sound faded into the ambient noise of the cell block, the coughing, the murmuring, the distant clanging of gates. I unfolded the paper. The handwriting was jagged, hurried, as if written on a knee or against a wall. It was not the elegant, looping script of my mother, nor the blocky, arrogant print of my father. It was not Gavin's lazy scrawl. I moved closer to the dim security light buzzing over the sink to read the words. "I have been waiting for you for 18 months. I have the drive. It was not wiped." There was no signature. My heart hammered against my ribs, a sudden, violent rhythm that made my breath hitch. I read the words again. "I have the drive. It was not wiped." For 3 years, the narrative had been absolute. The prosecution, led by the testimony of my own family, had claimed that the dashcam footage from the accident was corrupted. They claimed a technical failure had erased the crucial 3 minutes that proved Marissa, my sister-in-law, had grabbed the steering wheel. They claimed the cloud backup was empty. My entire defense had crumbled because the technology I dedicated my life to had seemingly failed me. My family had stood in court, faces masks of tragic sorrow, and testified that I was unstable. They said I was jealous of Marissa's pregnancy. They said I drove into that median on purpose. And because the camera failed, it was their word against the word of a woman they had painted as a cold, unfeeling workaholic. But someone knew. Someone knew the camera had not failed. Someone knew the data existed. Waiting for 18 months. That timeline was specific. 18 months ago was the exact midpoint of my sentence. It was around the time Gavin had announced the rebranding of North Crest, scrubbing my name from the company history. I crushed the paper in my hand, my knuckles turning white. I had spent 1,096 days telling myself that I would have to build my case from scratch. I thought I would have to spend years digging through forensic accounting, clawing my way back into systems I was locked out of, fighting a war of attrition against a family with infinite resources. I was wrong. I looked at the scratches on the wall one last time. I had thought I was walking out of here alone to face a firing squad, but this note changed the entire landscape of the battlefield. There was a ghost in the machine. Someone on the outside had preserved the truth. Someone had watched my family lie, watched them dismantle my life, and had quietly, secretly, kept the smoking gun safe. It was not a family member. My family had circled the wagons long ago. This was a variable they had not accounted for. A cold smile touched my lips. a sensation so foreign it felt like cracking ice. I did not know who wrote the note. I did not know if they were a friend or an opportunist, but it did not matter. My parents, Gavin, and Marissa were likely sleeping soundly tonight in their climate-controlled bedrooms, confident that the Haley problem was solved. They thought tomorrow would just be the release of a broken ex-convict who would fade into obscurity. They thought they had buried the truth deep enough that no one would ever find it. They forgot one thing about the company I built. I designed the architecture. I knew where the bodies were buried because I dug the holes for the vaults myself. But more importantly, I now knew that someone else had a map. I lay back down on the bunk, clutching the piece of paper against my chest like a shield. I did not sleep. I stared at the ceiling, watching the shadows shift as the guards made their rounds, counting down the minutes until sunrise. 1,096 days of silence were over. Tomorrow, the world would see Haley Brooks again, and this time, I was not coming to build. I was coming to burn it all down. The memory always begins with the sound of the rain. It was not a gentle shower. It was a deluge. A violent sheet of gray water hammering against the windshield of my SUV with enough force to drown out the radio. I was gripping the leather steering wheel at 10 and 2. My knuckles white, navigating the slick curves of Interstate 70, heading toward the specialist clinic in Denver. The wipers were thrashing back and forth, fighting a losing battle against the storm. Beside me sat Marissa, my sister-in-law. She was 6 months pregnant, her hands resting protectively over the swell of her stomach. She looked fragile, the picture of impending motherhood, wrapped in a cashmere cardigan that probably cost more than my first car. My mother had orchestrated this drive. She had called me at 6 in the morning, her voice laced with that specific brand of maternal guilt she wielded like a scalpel. "Haley, you have the safest car. You know how nervous Gavin gets driving in the rain. Just take her. It is a simple checkup. Family makes sacrifices." So, I sacrificed my morning board meeting. I sacrificed the final review of the encryption protocols for our new government contract. I played the dutiful daughter and the supportive sister-in-law. For the first 20 minutes, the car was silent except for the rhythmic thrum of the tires on wet asphalt and the roar of the wind. I focused on the road, watching the red taillights of a semi-truck ahead of us blur through the downpour. Then Marissa cleared her throat. "Gavin is worried," she said softly. Her voice was small, designed to elicit sympathy. "About the baby?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the lane markers. "The doctor said the last ultrasound was perfect." "No, about the company," she corrected. The shift in her tone was subtle, but I heard it. The fragility evaporated, replaced by a steely edge. "He thinks you are freezing him out. Haley?" I sighed, tightening my grip on the wheel. "We have discussed this. Marissa, we are 3 weeks away from the Series B funding round. Everything is frozen. No withdrawals. No selling of shares. The valuation has to be stable for the investors." "He needs access to his equity," she said, louder this time. "He found an opportunity, a real estate development in Lodo. It is a sure thing, but he needs liquid capital by Friday." "He wants to pull liquidity out of a tech startup to dump it into condos?" I let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Absolutely not. If he dumps his shares now, it triggers a panic. The valuation drops. We lose the investors. I am not letting Gavin tank 3 years of my work for a gamble." "It is his money too," Marissa snapped. She turned in her seat, facing me, the seatbelt locked against her shoulder. "Mom and Dad agree with him. They say you are being controlling. They say you treat Northcrest like it is your personal kingdom and Gavin is just a guest." "Because he acts like a guest," I shot back, my patience fraying. "He shows up for the photo shoots and the parties. I am the one sleeping in the server room. I am the one auditing the code. Tell Gavin he can have his money after the round closes in 2 months, not a day sooner." "We do not have 2 months!" Marissa's voice rose to a shriek. "He promised the partners the money would be there. If he backs out, he looks like a fool. He looks like a child who has to ask his big sister for allowance." "Then maybe he should stop acting like one." The air in the car grew heavy, suffocating. I checked the speedometer, 55 miles per hour. I eased off the accelerator as the rain intensified, turning the world outside into a blurred watercolor painting. "You enjoy this," Marissa hissed. "You love seeing him beg. You love holding the purse strings because it is the only way you can feel superior. You know Mom and Dad love him more. You know you are just the bank account." "Stop it, Marissa," I warned, my voice low. "I am driving. We can talk about this when I drop you off." "No, we settle this now. Sign the transfer authorization. Call the CFO." I said no. "You are a selfish, jealous bitch," she spat. "You do not want him to succeed. You want him to fail so you can be the only Brooks who matters." "I am protecting the company," I yelled, finally breaking. "You are protecting your ego." Then, the world tilted. We were entering a slight curve. The semi-truck ahead tapped its brakes. I began to slow down. Suddenly, Marissa lunged. It happened in slow motion and fast forward all at once. Her left hand, manicured and adorned with a diamond ring, shot across the center console. She didn't strike me. She grabbed the bottom of the steering wheel. "Marissa, let go," I screamed. "Give him the money," she shrieked, her face contorted into something unrecognizable. She yanked the wheel hard to the right. The tires lost their grip on the waterlogged asphalt. The heavy SUV didn't turn. It slid. It hydroplaned, floating sideways like a hockey puck on ice. I fought the wheel, trying to correct, trying to steer into the skid. But Marissa was still pulling, her weight throwing off the balance. We spun. One rotation, the world outside became a kaleidoscope of gray sky and concrete. I saw the guardrail rushing toward us. I saw the concrete divider. "No," I gasped. The impact was a deafening crunch of metal and glass. The airbags detonated like gunshots, filling the cabin with white powder and the smell of burning chemicals. The car shuddered violently, grinding against the concrete, sparks flying past the window, before finally coming to a halt. Silence returned, heavier than before. My ears were ringing, my chest burned where the seatbelt had locked. I coughed, waving away the airbag dust. "Marissa?" I choked out. She was slumped in her seat, the airbag deflated in her lap. She was groaning, clutching her stomach. "My baby," she whimpered. "My baby." The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights and hushed voices. I sat on the edge of a plastic chair in the hallway, a bandage taped over a cut on my forehead. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I kept replaying those 3 seconds in my head. The grab, the spin, the crunch. A doctor in a white coat emerged from Marissa's room. His face was grim. My parents and Gavin were already there. They had arrived 20 minutes ago, rushing past me without a word to storm into the room. Now, they stood in a tight circle around the doctor. "I am sorry," the doctor said, his voice carrying down the sterile corridor. "The trauma from the seatbelt, the impact. There was a placental abruption. We lost the heartbeat." A wail echoed from the room. It was my mother. I felt the blood drain from my face. The floor seemed to sway beneath me. A child, a life, gone. Guilt, hot and acidic, flooded my throat, even though she grabbed the wheel. I was the driver. I was the captain of the ship. I should have reacted faster. I should have seen it coming. The door to the room opened again. 2 uniformed police officers stepped out, followed by my father. My father looked at me. His eyes were not filled with grief. They were filled with calculation. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "That is her," he said to the officers. The officers approached me. They were tall, imposing figures with stone faces. "Haley Brooks?" the older officer asked. "Yes," I whispered. Is she okay?" "Ms. Brooks, we need you to come down to the station," the officer said. "We have taken a statement from the victim." "The victim?" I frowned, confusion cutting through the shock. "It was an accident. The rain. We hydroplaned." "That is not what the passenger says," the officer replied coldly. "Ms. Brooks Miller stated that you two were engaged in a heated argument about financial matters. She claims you became enraged, shouted that you would end this right now, and deliberately jerked the steering wheel toward the median. I stared at him, my mouth falling open. What? No, that is insane. She grabbed the wheel. She was trying to force me to agree to a transfer. She grabbed the wheel. I looked past the officers. Gavin was standing in the doorway of the hospital room. He was holding Marissa's hand, but he was looking at me. His face was blank, completely void of emotion. He heard the lie. He knew it was a lie. He knew Marissa's temper. He knew my driving record. Gavin, I pleaded, standing up. Tell them she is lying. Why would I crash my own car? Why would I hurt her? Gavin didn't speak. He just watched me, his eyes dark and unreadable. It was a look I would come to understand later. It was the look of a man who realized that the tragedy could be repurposed. A dead baby was a tragedy. A sister in prison was an opportunity. Gavin! I screamed. Ma'am, lower your voice, the officer ordered, placing a hand on his belt. Check the car, I shouted, desperation clawing at my throat. My car logs everything. There is a dash cam. There is internal telemetry. It records steering torque. It will show force coming from the passenger side. Check the data. The officer exchanged a glance with his partner. We have a team on the way to the impound lot now. Good, I said, breathing hard. Good. The data won't lie. 6 hours later, I was sitting in an interrogation room that smelled of stale coffee and sweat. My lawyer, a family friend named Mr. Henderson, who handled our corporate contracts, looked pale. The door opened. A detective walked in, carrying a folder. He tossed it onto the metal table. We pulled the black box and the hard drive from the vehicle, the detective said. And? I leaned forward, eager for the vindication. You saw it? You saw her grab the wheel? The detective looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. The impact damaged the writing mechanism of the drive. The files from the last 10 minutes of the trip are corrupted, unrecoverable. I froze. That is impossible. Northcrest designed the encryption for those drives. They are solid state. They are shock resistant up to 50 Gs. A fender bender on the highway would not wipe them. The technician said the unit was faulty, the detective said, shrugging. Maybe a power surge. Either way, the video is gone. And the steering logs? They just show a sharp right turn. No way to prove whose hand applied the force. I sat back in the chair, the cold metal pressing against my spine. It wasn't just a lie. It was a symphony. Marissa provided the narrative. The dead child provided the emotional weight. And somehow, miraculously, the technology I built had failed at the exact moment I needed it most. I looked at the mirror on the wall. Knowing my parents were likely on the other side, they weren't grieving. They were planning. You are charging me, I said flatly. Vehicular assault, the detective said. Reckless endangerment, and given the loss of the fetus, the district attorney is looking at manslaughter charges. I closed my eyes. I could still hear the rain. I could still see Marissa's hand shooting across the console. They had not just taken my freedom. They had taken the truth and locked it in a black box that they claimed was broken. But as I sat there, a cold, hard realization settled in my gut, heavier than the handcuffs they were about to place on my wrists. My car uploads to the cloud in real time. If the onboard drive was corrupted by the crash, the upload might have been interrupted. But if the technician said the data was gone, he was lying. He didn't just find a broken drive. He made sure it was broken. Someone had gotten to the car before the police tech did, or the police tech was the one who was bought. I didn't say a word. I didn't tell them about the cloud backup. If they had the reach to corrupt the physical drive, they had the reach to delete a server file if they knew where to look. I stayed silent. I let them book me. I let them take my fingerprints. I let them think they had won. Because in that interrogation room, the sister who drove the car died. And the woman who would spend 3 years plotting her revenge was born. The courtroom was not a place of justice. It was a theater. And I was the only actor who had not been given a script. The air inside the Denver County Courthouse was stale. recycled through vents that rattled with a low, persistent hum. I sat at the defense table, my hands folded on top of a scarred wooden surface. I was wearing a gray suit that smelled faintly of dry cleaning chemicals, a size too large because I had lost 10 pounds in the 6 weeks since the accident. Beside me sat Arthur Gentry, a public defender who looked like he had not slept in a decade. His briefcase was overflowing with files from a dozen other cases. His tie was crooked, and he smelled of stale tobacco. He was a decent man, I suspected, but he was drowning. He was the best defense I could afford, which was the first part of the trap my family had sprung. 48 hours after my arrest, while I was still processing the shock of the crash, my father had filed an emergency ex parte motion. He claimed that the trauma of the accident, combined with the guilt of causing Marissa's miscarriage, had rendered me mentally unstable. He painted a picture of a woman on the edge of a breakdown, a flight risk, a danger to herself and the company assets. A judge signed the order without a hearing. In the blink of an eye, my bank accounts were frozen, my credit cards were declined. The millions of dollars in liquid assets I had earned building Northcrest Vault were locked behind a legal firewall I could not breach. I could not hire the firm that usually represented me. I could not hire a forensic investigator. I was a CEO with a net worth of 9 figures. Yet I had to rely on a court-appointed lawyer who had met me for exactly 45 minutes before jury selection began. I looked across the aisle. The prosecution table was neat, organized, and confident. Behind them, in the first row of the gallery, sat the Brooks family. My mother, Diane, was wearing black. It was a modest, high-necked dress that made her look smaller, frailer. She held a handkerchief to her nose, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. Beside her, my father, Robert, sat with a stoic, protective arm around her shoulders. He looked like a pillar of strength in the face of tragedy. And then there was Gavin. My brother sat on the other side of our mother, his head bowed. He was playing the role of the grieving father and the reluctant brother perfectly. He did not look at me, not once. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Harrison entered. He was an older man with a face like worn leather and eyes that had seen too many lies to care about the truth anymore. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and nodded to the prosecutor. "Call your next witness," the judge said. "The people called Diane Brooks," the prosecutor announced. My mother took the stand. She swore to tell the truth, her hand trembling on the Bible. When the prosecutor asked her to describe our family dynamic, she took a shaky breath. "We have always tried to support Haley," she said, her voice soft, forcing the jury to lean in. She has always been difficult, driven, ambitious. We were so proud of her company, but success, it changed her." "In what way, Mrs. Brooks?" the prosecutor asked gently. "She became cold," my mother said, wiping her eye. "She stopped coming to Sunday dinners. She became obsessed with control. When Gavin married Marissa, Haley seemed resentful. She made comments about how Marissa was distracting Gavin. When Marissa got pregnant, Haley did not even congratulate them. She just asked how it would affect Gavin's work schedule. It was a lie, a subtle, poisonous lie. I had sent flowers. I had set up a college fund for the baby the day they announced it. But the jury did not see the bank transfers I couldn't access to prove it. They only saw a grieving grandmother. "Tell us about the day of the accident," the prosecutor prompted. "I asked her to drive Marissa." My mother sobbed. I thought if they spent time together, maybe Haley would soften. Maybe she would feel a connection to the baby. I never imagined." She broke down, burying her face in her hands. "I trusted her with my grandchild, and she destroyed our family." The jury looked at me. I felt their gaze like physical blows. They saw a monster, a barren, career-obsessed woman who was jealous of the fertility and happiness of her younger brother. Then came Gavin. He walked to the stand with a heavy, trudging step. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Haley and I were arguing about the business," Gavin testified. "I wanted to expand. I wanted to take some risks. Haley. She treated Northcrest like her personal property. She told me I was incompetent. She told me I did not deserve the name Brooks. Did she mention your wife? The prosecutor asked. Yes, Gavin said, finally looking up, but staring past me at the back wall. She said Marissa was a leech. She said the baby was just another expense. She said she wished I had never met her. I gripped the edge of the table so hard, a splinter dug into my thumb. I welcomed the pain. It kept me from screaming. And what did Marissa tell you happened in the car? She said Haley snapped, Gavin said, his voice dropping to a whisper. She said Haley looked at her with pure hate and yanked the wheel. She said Haley wanted to hurt us where it mattered most. Mr. Gentry tried to cross-examine him. He asked about the loan Gavin wanted, about the liquidity issues. Objection, the prosecutor cut in. Relevance. This is a vehicular assault trial, not a corporate audit. Sustained, Judge Harrison ruled. My motive for snapping was cemented. I was the jealous spinster sister. But the final nail in my coffin was not emotional. It was technical. The people called Dr. Eris Thorne, the prosecutor said. A man in a sharp suit walked in. He carried himself with the arrogance of an expert witness who was paid $500 an hour. He claimed to be a specialist in automotive data forensics. Dr. Thorne, did you examine the onboard computer of the defendant's vehicle? I did, Thorne said, adjusting his rimless glasses. And what did you find regarding the camera footage? Catastrophic right failure, Thorne stated. The solid-state drive experienced a localized voltage spike, likely triggered by the initial impact with the median. The sectors containing the data for that specific time frame were scrambled, irretrievable. Is that common? It is rare, Thorne admitted, but in high-velocity impacts involving water damage, it is possible. It was a perfect storm of mechanical and electrical failure. Mr. Gentry stood up for cross-examination. He looked small next to Thorne. Dr. Thorne, Gentry said, shuffling his papers. Ms. Brooks founded a data security company. She designed the architecture for that specific drive. She claims it is shielded against exactly this kind of surge. Thorne smiled, a condescending twitch of his lips. With all due respect to the defendant, theory and reality are different things. I have the drive and evidence. It is a brick. Unless Ms. Brooks has a magic wand, that data is gone. What about the cloud backup? Gentry asked. The car transmits data. We checked the logs, Thorne said smoothly. The transmission module was disabled at the time of the crash, likely turned off by the driver. I froze. I never turned off the transmission module. Never? No further questions, Gentry mumbled, sitting down. I looked at Gentry. Ask him for the transmission logs, I whispered urgently. Ask him for the timestamp of when it was disabled. We don't have time, Haley, Gentry whispered back, and we don't have an expert to refute him. If I push him, he will just bury us in jargon the jury doesn't understand. The trial moved to closing arguments. The prosecutor called me a narcissist. He called me a danger to society. He pointed to the empty chair where Marissa should have been, holding a baby. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, they did not look at me. That is the universal sign. We find the defendant, Haley Brooks, guilty of vehicular assault and reckless endangerment. The courtroom erupted in low murmurs. My mother sobbed loudly. Gavin put his head in his hands. I sat perfectly still. I did not cry. I did not react. I was already calculating the appeal, the motion to vacate, the forensic audit I would launch the second I had access to a computer. But they had anticipated that too. Judge Harrison looked down at me over his spectacles. Ms. Brooks, your actions have caused irreversible harm to your family. You used a vehicle as a weapon. You showed a complete disregard for human life, driven by what appears to be a toxic obsession with control and financial dominance. He paused, shuffling the sentencing papers. I sentence you to 3 years in the state correctional facility, he announced. 3 years. It was harsh, but survivable. I could run the company from a cell if I had to. I could delegate. Furthermore, the judge continued, and this was the blade they had been hiding. Given that the conflict originated from a dispute over corporate assets, and given the psychological evaluation suggesting your professional ambition has become pathological, I am adding a special condition to your probation. My heart stopped. Effective immediately, and for the duration of your sentence plus 2 years of parole, you are barred from holding any fiduciary position in a publicly traded company. You are removed from the board of Northcrest Vault. You are forbidden from contacting employees or accessing corporate servers. Control of your assets will remain in the court-appointed trust, administered by your next of kin, until you can demonstrate rehabilitation. The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot. I looked at the gallery. For the first time, Gavin looked at me. He wasn't crying anymore. His face was dry. He looked at me, and then he looked at the judge, and he gave a barely perceptible nod. They didn't just want me in prison. Prison was temporary. They wanted the company. By labeling me unstable, by tying the crime to the business, they had convinced a judge to strip me of the one thing I had that they didn't: power. They had used the legal system to execute a hostile takeover. The bailiff moved behind me. Hands behind your back, Ms. Brooks? I stood up. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around my wrists. As I was led out of the side door, I looked back one last time. My parents were hugging the prosecutor. Gavin was on his phone, likely already calling the board of directors to announce the change in leadership. They thought they had won. They thought they had cut the head off the snake. But as the heavy door closed behind me, shutting out the sight of their victory, I realized something they had missed. They had taken my title. They had taken my money. They had taken my freedom. But they had left me with my mind, and they had just given me 3 years with nothing to do but think. I didn't scream. I didn't fight the bailiff. I walked into the holding cell with my head high. Take it, I thought, the darkness of the cell swallowing me. Take it all. Keep it warm for me. Because when I come back, I am not coming for the shares. I am coming for the blood. 6 months into my sentence, the visitation request came through. I had rejected the first dozen, leaving the slips of paper to gather dust on the guard station desk. But this time, the request was flagged as legal urgency by the prison administration. My public defender, Gentry, had sent a brief note saying that if I did not take the meeting, the court might interpret it as further noncompliance with the asset restructuring order. So, I walked into the visitation room. The room was a cavernous space painted a color that could only be described as despair beige, filled with round plastic tables bolted to the floor. It smelled of floor wax and cheap vending machine coffee. My family was sitting at table 4. They looked like they had been cut out of a magazine and pasted into a grayscale nightmare. My mother, Diane, wore a cream-colored silk blouse that probably cost more than the annual salary of the guard watching us. My father, Robert, was in a navy pinstripe suit, his tie knotted with aggressive precision. Gavin sat next to him, looking less like a brother and more like a junior executive waiting for a performance review. Marissa was there too, wearing a pastel dress, her hands folded demurely on her lap, looking the picture of recovered health. And then there was Noah. My youngest brother sat at the far end of the table. Noah was 26, 8 years my junior. He had always been the quiet one, the one who chose numbers over people, working as a quantitative analyst for a hedge fund in Chicago. He was not looking at me. He was staring at the scuffed linoleum floor, his face unreadable. I sat down. The metal chair was cold against my legs through the thin orange fabric of my jumpsuit. I did not say hello. I did not smile. I just placed my hands flat on the table and waited. "Haley," my mother began, her voice trembling with that practiced, fragile vibrato she used when she wanted to control a room. "You look thin." "State nutrition is focused on calories, not cuisine," I said flatly. "Why are you here?" My father cleared his throat. He did not look me in the eye. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents, sliding them across the table. The paper made a dry, rasping sound against the plastic. We need to settle the ownership structure, my father said. His tone was business, the same tone he used when ordering a steak. The market is reacting poorly to the uncertainty. The share price has dropped 15% since the sentencing. The investors are nervous. I glanced at the document. The title was bold and centered: Irrevocable Proxy and Transfer of Voting Rights. I looked up. The court already stripped me of my board seat. Dad, I cannot make decisions. I cannot fire anyone. What more do you want? The court removed you from leadership, Gavin interjected. His voice was smooth, polished, the voice of the man currently sitting in my chair. But you still hold 40% of the Class B voting shares in your blind trust. We cannot issue new stock or close the merger deal without those votes. Merger? I raised an eyebrow. I explicitly wrote into the company charter that Northcrest would remain independent for 5 years. We are a security firm. Independence is our product. Strategies change. Haley, Gavin said, leaning forward. We have an offer from Omnicorp. It is a lucrative exit, but we need a supermajority vote to approve it. We need your shares to vote yes. You want to sell, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. I built that company from a basement. I wrote the code that protects the data of half the hospitals in this state. And you want to strip it for parts and sell it to a conglomerate? It is for the best, my mother said, reaching out as if to touch my hand, then pulling back when I didn't move. Con, please listen. You have to sacrifice so the family can survive. The legal fees, the scandal, it has cost us so much. This deal secures everyone's future. It secures your future when you get out. My future? I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You put me in a cage for 3 years, and now you want me to fund your retirement? This is not about money, my father snapped, his facade cracking. This is about legacy. Your grandfather built this family's reputation from nothing. You dragged the Brooks name through the mud with your temper and your recklessness. This is the only way to salvage our standing in the community. My temper, I repeated. I looked at Marissa. She met my gaze for a second, then looked away, smoothing the fabric of her dress. Tell me, Marissa, I said softly, does the new car have a dash cam? Or did you disable that one too? Stop it, Gavin hissed. She is the victim here. Do not try to manipulate her. I am not manipulating anyone, I said. I am reading a contract, and the answer is no. I pushed the papers back across the table. The silence that followed was absolute. My father's face turned a shade of red I remembered from my childhood, the color of suppressed rage. You are being selfish, my mother whispered, tears instantly filling her eyes. After everything we have done for you, we raised you, we supported you. You framed me, I said. My voice was steady, void of the hysteria they wanted to see. You used a tragedy to steal my life's work, and now you realize that even in prison, I still have the one thing you need. I still own the foundation. Haley, be reasonable, Gavin said, his voice taking on a pleading edge that made my skin crawl. You always said the company does not belong to one person. You said it belongs to the mission. If we do not sell, the stock tanks, the employees lose value. Is that what you want? I want the truth, I said. But since you deleted that, I will settle for watching you fail. My father stood up. The chair screeched against the floor. You are ungrateful, he spat. You are willing to let the ship sink just to spite the captain. I am the captain, I said, looking up at him. You are just the mutineers who don't know how to navigate. I stood up. The guard at the door took a step forward, sensing the tension. This is the last time, I said, looking at each of them in turn. Do not come back. Do not write. Do not send lawyers. I will serve my time. I will sit in this box for every single day of my sentence, but I'm not signing that paper. If you want my shares, you will have to wait until I walk out of here and you can try to take them from me in a boardroom. And good luck with that. Haley, wait, my mother cried out, but I was already turning away. Guard, I said. I am done. As I turned, my eyes locked with Noah. He had not moved a muscle during the entire exchange. He had not spoken a word. He had not looked at the contract, and he had not looked at our parents. He had been watching Gavin. Now, he looked at me. I expected to see pity, or maybe the same disappointment that was etched on my father's face. Noah was the baby of the family, the one who usually followed the path of least resistance. But there was no pity in his eyes. His expression was cold, clinical, almost mathematical. He looked at me the way an actuary looks at a risk table. He gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a nod of agreement. It was a nod of acknowledgement. It was the look of someone checking a watch. I turned my back on them and walked toward the heavy steel door. I heard my mother sobbing behind me, a sound that used to tear me apart, but now just sounded like noise. I heard my father cursing. I walked through the door and let the heavy clang of the lock seal them away. I went back to my cell. I sat on my bunk, and for the first time in 6 months, I slept through the night. I did not know what Noah's look meant. I did not know if he was an enemy or a neutral observer, but I knew one thing for certain. They were desperate. They needed my signature because they were bleeding money. My refusal to sign wasn't just spite. It was a tactical nuclear strike. I had just frozen them in time. They couldn't sell. They couldn't move. They were trapped in the company I built, forced to try and run a machine they didn't understand, while the market watched them fail. I would wait. I would watch the stock ticker on the news in the common room. I would watch the slow, agonizing decline of the Brooks family empire. And when I walked out, I would be walking into the ruins. Ruins are easier to rebuild than occupied fortresses. That night, I made a new mark on the wall, not for time served, but for the first battle won. The heavy steel gate of the correctional facility did not open with a cinematic creak. It slid back with a mechanical grind, a sound of gears and hydraulics that I had memorized over 1,096 days. The first thing that hit me was the light. It was not the filtered, gray light of the exercise yard, obscured by chain-link fencing and razor wire. This was raw, unfiltered Colorado sunlight, sharp enough to make my eyes water. I took a step forward, my shoes, simple canvas loafers provided by the state, crunched on the gravel. I was wearing the clothes I had been arrested in 3 years ago, a white silk blouse that was now slightly yellowed from storage, and a pair of dark slacks that hung loose on my hips. I had lost 15 pounds of muscle and softness, replaced by a wire-thin tension that held my bones together. I expected emptiness. I expected a long walk to the bus stop. Instead, I walked into a wall of noise. The shutter click started first, a rapid-fire sound like a swarm of cicadas. Then came the shouts. Haley, over here. Ms. Brooks, do you have a statement? Haley, how does it feel to be out? Is it true Northcrest is being sold? I blinked, my eyes adjusting. A barricade had been set up 20 yards from the gate. Behind it stood a phalanx of photographers and reporters. News vans with satellite dishes were parked on the grass shoulder. I had forgotten that outside these walls, I was not just inmate 49205. I was Haley Brooks, the fallen tech darling, the ice queen, who crashed her car to kill her nephew. But the press was merely the backdrop. The real performance was center stage. Standing right in front of the media line, positioned perfectly for the cameras, were my parents. My mother held a bouquet of white lilies, huge and ostentatious, wrapped in crinkling plastic. She was wearing a soft blue coat, a color chosen to project forgiveness and maternal warmth. My father stood next to her, looking solemn and relieved, the weary patriarch ready to welcome the stray sheep back into the fold. They were staging a reunion. I saw the setup instantly. They needed a photo of the hug. They needed the image of the Brooks family whole again. If they could get a picture of me crying in my mother's arms, they could spin the narrative. See? She is rehabilitated. She is back in the family. The proxy fight is over. The merger can proceed. That single photo would probably stabilize the Northcrest stock price by 10% before the market closed. I kept walking. My face was a mask of granite. "Haley!" my mother called out, her voice pitching up to ensure the microphones caught it. She took a step forward, opening her arms. "Oh, thank God. Haley, darling." My father stepped forward too, reaching out a hand. "Welcome home, daughter. It is over. The car is right here." He gestured to a silver sedan parked nearby. The family driver standing by the open door. It was a trap. If I got in that car, I was theirs. They would drive me to a private facility or a remote estate and pressure me until I signed the shares over. I did not break stride. I walked straight toward them. My mother's smile faltered slightly as she saw my eyes. There was no warmth in them. There was no recognition. I looked at her the way one looks at a stranger on a crowded street. "Haley," she faltered, lowering her arms. I walked past her. I did not stop. I did not speak. I did not acknowledge the flowers or the tears or the carefully rehearsed script. I brushed past my father's outstretched hand without flinching, leaving him grasping at empty air. The camera shutters went into a frenzy. The reporters began to shout louder, sensing the disruption. "Haley, are you not going with your parents? Ms. Brooks, is there a rift?" I kept my eyes fixed on the horizon, walking down the center of the access road. My parents were left standing there, frozen in a tableau of rejected benevolence. I could feel their panic radiating off them like heat. This was not in the script. I was supposed to be broken. I was supposed to be grateful. Then, the sound of a powerful engine cut through the cacophony. A matte black sedan, long and sleek, glided around the corner of the news vans. It was not a family car. It was a weapon on wheels, a customized armored luxury vehicle, the kind used by heads of state and billionaires who have enemies. The car did not stop for the reporters. It rolled smoothly past the police barricade, ignoring the waving hands of the press, and pulled up directly alongside me. The rear door opened from the inside. A man stepped out. The reporters went silent for a split second. Even my father, who was turning around in confusion, stiffened. It was Ronan Hale. In the world of corporate law, there are sharks, and then there are leviathans. Ronan Hale was the latter. He was the man you called when you wanted to destroy a Fortune 500 company, not defend one. He was known for two things: his astronomical fees and his absolute refusal to settle. He was 6'2" of bespoke tailoring and terrifying intellect. He adjusted the cuffs of his suit jacket and looked at me. He did not smile. He did not look at me with pity. He looked at me with respect. "Ms. Brooks," Ronan said. His voice was a deep baritone, projected perfectly so that every microphone within 50 feet picked it up. "Your carriage is ready." My father rushed forward, abandoning his stoic pose. "Who are you? What is this? Haley is coming with us." Ronan turned to look at my father. The movement was slow, deliberate. He looked at Robert Brooks with the mild disinterest of a man scraping mud off his shoe. "Mr. Brooks," Ronan said, "I am Ronan Hale. I have been retained as legal counsel for Ms. Brooks." "Counsel?" my father sputtered. "She has a lawyer, and she is a convicted felon. She is under probation." Ronan turned back to the press. He looked directly into the lens of the nearest news camera. "Haley Brooks is not a felon," Ronan declared. "She is the founding chairman of Northcrest Vault, and she is the victim of a malicious prosecution." The gasp from the crowd was audible. My mother dropped the flowers. Ronan continued, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "We are filing a motion for post-conviction relief this afternoon. We are submitting evidence of perjury, evidence tampering, and a conspiracy to defraud the court. Ms. Brooks was sentenced on a lie." He turned to me and extended a hand toward the open car door. "Shall we, Madam Chairman?" I looked at my parents one last time. My mother's face had gone pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. My father looked like he had been punched in the gut. They weren't looking at a rebellious daughter anymore. They were looking at an enemy who had just brought a nuclear warhead to a knife fight. They knew who Ronan Hale was, and they knew he did not take cases unless he had the ammunition to win. I turned my back on them. "Let's go," I said. I slid into the leather interior of the car. The door closed with a solid, heavy thud, sealing out the noise, the press, and the family that had sold me out. The car accelerated instantly, pressing me back into the seat. We were moving. For a long moment, there was silence inside the cabin. The air conditioning was set to exactly 68 degrees. The windows were tinted dark enough that the world outside was just a blur of motion. I exhaled, a breath I felt like I had been holding for 3 years. Ronan sat across from me, his long legs crossed. He opened a small refrigerator built into the console and pulled out a bottle of sparkling water. He cracked the seal and handed it to me. "That went well," he said dryly. "Your father looked like he was about to have a coronary event." "He might yet," I said. Taking the water, my hands were steady. "Thank you for the entrance." "Theater is half the battle in the court of public opinion," Ronan said. "You were the villain. Now, you are the mystery. By tonight, every news outlet in the country will be asking what evidence we have. The narrative has shifted." I took a sip of the water. It was cold and clean. "You took a risk saying we have evidence. If we don't deliver, we look like fools." Ronan reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a sleek, black smartphone. It was a secure model, the kind that didn't have a brand name on the case. "I don't bluff, Haley. You know that." He slid the phone across the leather seat toward me. "The note you received inside said someone had been waiting," Ronan said. "That person is a very talented digital forensic specialist who used to work for you. When the accident happened, they noticed a data anomaly in the cloud logs, a packet that was flagged as deleted but had a shadow copy on a redundant server." I picked up the phone. It was already unlocked. "The drive?" I asked, looking up at him. "The physical drive in the car was destroyed. Hammered, magnets, the works," Ronan explained. "But your car, the prototype model you were driving, it had a secondary telemetry uplink, a black box for the black box. Designed for engineering diagnostics, it uploads via satellite, not cellular. It bypasses the standard entertainment unit." I felt a chill run down my spine. I had approved that feature 4 years ago during the beta phase of the vehicle's operating system. I had forgotten it was active in my personal car. And, Ronan said, a small, predatory smile touching his lips. "It captured everything. The audio, the steering torque sensors, the interior camera feed." He tapped the screen of the phone. A video file was paused on the display. The timestamp was the date of the accident. "We have the video of her grabbing the wheel. Haley," Ronan said softly. "We have her screaming about the money. We have Gavin's text messages to her 5 minutes before the crash telling her to do whatever it takes to get you to sign." I stared at the phone. The device felt heavy in my hand, like a loaded gun. "My family," I said quietly. "They think it is gone." "They think you are helpless," Ronan corrected. "They think they are fighting a woman with no resources and a public defender. They do not know they are fighting me. And they certainly do not know we have this." I looked out the window. The city of Denver was scrolling past, a skyline of glass and steel. Somewhere in one of those towers, Gavin was probably sitting in my office, feet up on my desk, thinking he had won. "I want to release it," I said. "Now, put it on the news." Ronan shook his head. "No, that is the emotional play. That is revenge. You hired me for justice, and justice is a process." "I told you," I said, turning to him, my voice hard. "I don't need revenge quickly. I need to destroy them." "Exactly," Ronan said. "If we release the video now, they claim it is a deepfake. They muddy the waters. They drag it out. We need to lure them in. We need to let them commit to the lie under oath one more time. We need to let Gavin try to finalize the sale of the company. We need to let them put everything on the line, thinking they are safe." He leaned forward. "We are going to let them build their house of cards as high as they possibly can, and then, when they are standing on the very top, waving to the crowd, that is when we pull the pin." I looked down at the phone again. I saw the thumbnail of Marissa's face in the video. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Safe house," Ronan said. "We have a team waiting, forensic accountants, investigators, and a wardrobe consultant, because you cannot destroy an empire wearing state-issued polyester. I sat back. The water bottle was cool against my palm. They brought flowers, I murmured. What? My parents, I said. They brought lilies, white lilies. They are for funerals. Ronan looked at me. Appropriate. I nodded. Yes, just not for mine. The car sped up, merging onto the highway, heading toward the city where my name was written on the buildings, and where my family was about to learn that the only thing more dangerous than a person with nothing to lose is a person who has everything to take back. The safe house was less of a home and more of a command center, suspended 40 stories above the streets of Denver. It was a penthouse in a building I recognized, one of the few developments in the city that Northcrest had not contracted with, which meant my family had no back doors into the security system here. The interior was stark, decorated in shades of charcoal and slate. The moment I walked in, the team Ronan had assembled was already in motion. There were 4 of them. 2 paralegals were setting up a portable server rack in the dining room, their fingers flying across ergonomic keyboards. A forensic accountant named Silas, a man who looked like a librarian but hunted money like a bloodhound, was arranging 3 monitors on the granite kitchen island. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Ms. Brooks," Silas said without looking up from his screens. "I have coffee brewing, real coffee, not that prison sludge." "Thank you," I said. My voice felt steadier here, surrounded by the hum of technology. This was my native habitat. Ronan guided me to the main living area where a garment rack had been set up. "Shower first, then clothes, then we go to war." 20 minutes later, I stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror. The orange jumpsuit was in the trash. I was wearing a tailored navy blazer, a white silk camisole, and trousers that fit perfectly. I buttoned the jacket, and for the first time in 3 years, I recognized the woman staring back at me. She wasn't an inmate. She was a CEO. I walked over to the kitchen island. Ronan was on the phone, his voice low and dangerous. "I do not care what the branch manager says," Ronan was saying. "The court order is explicit. We are executing a writ of attachment on the Brooks Family Trust and all subsidiary accounts linked to the Northcrest holding entity. If you delay the freeze by even 5 minutes, I will name you personally in the obstruction of justice filing." He listened for a moment, then hung up. "The bank?" I asked. "They are stalling," Ronan said, sliding a tablet toward me. "Standard procedure when a high-value client suddenly gets flagged. Your father likely has a standing instruction with the Wealth Management Division to alert him of any unusual activity. They are trying to buy time to move the liquid capital offshore." "Can they?" "Not anymore," Silas interjected. He tapped a key, and a red progress bar on his center monitor turned green. I just bypassed the branch authorization and went straight to the Federal Compliance Database. I flagged the accounts for potential money laundering reviews. The system automatically locks everything down for 48 hours while it verifies. Not even your father can move a cent right now. His credit cards are currently paperweights. A small, vicious satisfaction curled in my chest. He is going to be embarrassed at lunch. "He is going to be destitute by dinner if we do this right," Ronan said. "We have filed the emergency motion to restore your shareholder rights. The argument is that since the conviction was based on perjured testimony and corrupted evidence, which we can now prove, the stripping of your fiduciary powers was illegitimate. We are asking for an immediate injunction against the merger vote." "It will take days for a judge to review," I said, the pragmatist in me surfacing. "Usually, yes," Ronan agreed, "but I called in a favor with the Chief Justice. We have a hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning. However, we need more than just the dashcam footage. We need to show why they did it. We need the motive. The dashcam proves the assault was a lie, but it does not explain the conspiracy." The intercom buzzed. "Delivery for Ms. Brooks," a distorted voice announced from the lobby security feed. "Courier service, priority 1. Ronan frowned. He signaled to the large man standing by the door, his personal security detail. "Check it, thoroughly." 5 minutes later, The guard returned carrying a plain, padded manila envelope. It had been scanned for explosives and electronic bugs. He handed it to me. There was no return address, just my name, handwritten in block letters. I tore open the seal. Inside was a single, silver USB drive and a folded piece of heavy cardstock. I pulled out the card. It was a note, written in a precise mathematical script that I knew instantly. I did not betray you. I'm just playing a role. The numbers never add up unless you look at the variables they tried to hide. Check the consulting folder. It was signed with a single letter, N. Noah. I looked up at Ronan, my hands shaking slightly. It is from my brother, Noah. The actuary? Ronan asked. I thought he was with the family. So did I whispered. I thought back to the visitation room. The cold way Noah had looked at me, the way he had checked his watch. He wasn't checking the time. He was timing the operation. He wasn't ignoring me. He was maintaining his cover. He had stayed inside the family circle, enduring their lies, quietly gathering what I could not. Plug it in, I told Silas. Now. Silas took the silver drive and inserted it into a quarantined laptop. He ran a sandbox scan, then opened the file directory. Holy Mother of God, Silas muttered, his eyes widening behind his glasses. What is it? I asked, leaning over his shoulder. It is the internal ledger, Silas said, scrolling rapidly. Not the one they show the shareholders, the real one, the one Gavin keeps on his private server. Look at the dates, I commanded. Silas highlighted a series of transactions. Here, 8 months before the accident, a transfer of $250,000 to a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Vertex Solutions, labeled as IT Consulting. I never hired a Vertex Solutions, I said. It continues, Silas said, his fingers dancing over the keys. Every month, 300,000, 500,000, then, 2 months before the crash, it ramps up. $2 million withdrawn for strategic acquisitions that never happened. I stared at the screen, the numbers blurring into a horrifying picture. Gavin, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. He wasn't just trying to expand the company, he was looting it. He was gambling, Silas corrected, opening a subfolder titled Debts. Look at this. These aren't business investments. These are payments to offshore sports books and high-risk derivative markers. Your brother has a gambling problem. Haley, a massive one. He had leveraged himself to the hilt. He needed the liquidity, I said, my voice barely a whisper. That day in the car, Marissa said he needed access to his equity for a real estate deal. It wasn't real estate. He was covering his losses. He was drowning. And you were the roadblock, Ronan said, stepping closer to the screen. You controlled the purse strings. You refused to let him cash out his shares until the funding round closed. As long as you were CEO, he couldn't cover his tracks. The auditors were coming for the Series B funding, and they would have found the missing millions. I felt a wave of nausea. The accident, I said. It wasn't an impulsive fight. It wasn't just Marissa snapping because I wouldn't sign a check. I looked at the dates again. The massive withdrawals stopped exactly 1 week after I was arrested. Once I was in custody and my assets were frozen, Gavin got temporary power of attorney. He used my money to plug the holes he had made in the company accounts. They planned it, I said, my voice hardening into steel. Maybe not the crash exactly as it happened, but they planned to remove me. Marissa provoked that fight. She knew the roads were slick. She knew I was driving. They needed a catastrophe. And the baby? Ronan asked gently. I remembered the medical report. Placental abruption. Silas, I said, is there anything on there about Marissa? Medical bills? Insurance claims? Silas clicked into a folder named Personal, M. Here, he said, an invoice from a private clinic in Aspen, dated 3 weeks before the accident. He opened the PDF. It was a receipt for a dilation and curettage procedure, a D&C. Miscarriage management. I read the medical code. The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the server fans. She wasn't pregnant, I said, the horror of it settling in my bones. Not in the car. She had already lost the baby weeks before. They used a miscarriage that had already happened. To frame you for manslaughter, Ronan finished, his face grim. They blamed the accident for a tragedy that had already occurred. They knew the autopsy on a fetus of that gestation would be inconclusive regarding the exact time of death if they rushed the cremation, which they did. I gripped the edge of the granite counter until my knuckles turned white. It was monstrous. It was beyond simple greed. It was a level of sociopathy I hadn't thought my family capable of. They had taken my grief for a grandchild I thought I killed, and they had weaponized it to cover up Gavin's gambling debts. "We have them," Silas said, looking up. "This proves fraud, embezzlement, perjury, filing false police reports. We can send them all to federal prison for 20 years. I can draft the affidavit right now." Ronan looked at me. "We have enough to stop the merger. We can walk into the judge's chambers tomorrow and blow the whole thing up. We can have Gavin arrested before lunch." I stared at the screen. I saw Gavin's name on the transfers. I saw my mother's signature on the authorization for the cremation. "No," I said. Ronan raised an eyebrow. "No?" "Gavin is in Dallas," I said. "He is at the tech summit. He is scheduled to sign the merger agreement with Omnicorp live on stage tomorrow afternoon. It is being live-streamed to every financial market in the world." "Yes," Ronan said. "That is why we need to stop him." "If we arrest him now," I said, turning to face them, "the story becomes about a scandalous family feud. He gets a lawyer. He spins it. He claims he was under duress. He claims Noah faked the data." I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. "I don't want a quiet arrest," I said. "I want the world to see who he is. I want the investors to see him sign a contract he has no authority to sign. I want the check to bounce while the cameras are rolling." I turned back to the room. "We file the injunction to freeze the assets, but we seal the motion until the last possible second," I instructed. "Let him get on that stage. Let him shake hands with the Omnicorp CEO. Let him think he has pulled off the heist of the century." "You want to ambush him," Ronan said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I want to humiliate him," I corrected. "I want him to feel exactly what I felt when the judge read my sentence. I want him to realize that his life is over while the whole world is watching." I pointed at the USB drive. "Prepare the package, but do not send it to the police yet. Send it to the compliance officer at Omnicorp, and send a copy to the bank processing the merger transaction." "Timing?" Silas asked, his hands hovering over the keyboard. 1 hour before the signing ceremony," I said. "Just enough time for the red flags to pop up in the system, but not enough time for Gavin to know they are there." Ronan nodded. "It is risky. If the bank is slow, the deal might go through before the freeze hits." "It won't," I said, "because I am going to be there." "You?" Ronan asked. "You are on probation. You can't leave the state." "I have a court hearing tomorrow morning here in Denver," I said. "But the signing is being broadcast. I will be in the audience, virtually, and we are going to make sure that when Gavin looks at the teleprompter, the only thing he sees is the notification that his access has been denied." I picked up the note from Noah. "I didn't betray you." "Noah gave us the ammunition," I said. "Now, let's load the gun." "Don't expose him yet," I said, looking at the image of my brother on the screen, smiling in a press photo. "Let him climb up to the podium. Let him bask in the applause. Let him think he is a king." I dropped the note onto the counter. "And then, let him collapse on stage." The Omni Dallas Hotel ballroom was a cathedral of glass and light, packed with 2,000 of the most influential people in the tech industry. From the high-definition monitors in our safe house in Denver, the scene looked like a coronation. I sat on the edge of the sofa, a notepad on my knee and a pen in my hand, beside me. Ronan stood with his arms crossed, watching the 60-inch screen. Silas was hunched over his laptop, his finger hovering over the enter key. "Target is on stage," Silas announced, his voice devoid of emotion. "Uplink to the banking core is active. We are just waiting for the trigger event." On the screen, My brother looked like the king he believed he was. Gavin was wearing a tuxedo that fit him too well, his hair styled to perfection. Behind him, a massive LED wall displayed the Northcrest Vault logo merging with the Omnicorp emblem. The tagline read, "Security for a New Century." "Ladies and gentlemen," Gavin boomed into the microphone, his charisma dialed up to 11. "For years, Northcrest has been a fortress, but a fortress can become a prison if it does not open its gates to the world. Today, we tear down the walls. Today, we join forces with Omnicorp in a deal valued at $2.4 billion to create the world's first global data sanctuary." The applause was thunderous. I watched my parents in the front row. My mother was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, playing the proud matriarch. My father was beaming, shaking hands with Marcus Sterling, the CEO of Omnicorp, who stood beside him. They looked so safe. They looked untouchable. "He is enjoying this too much," Ronan murmured. "Let him," I said, my eyes fixed on Gavin's smile. "The higher he climbs, the longer the fall." "And to celebrate this historic union," Gavin continued, gesturing to a waiter who wheeled out a cart bearing a Nebuchadnezzar of champagne, a bottle the size of a torso, and a sleek credit card terminal. "I am personally kicking off the reception with a $50,000 donation to the Future Coders Initiative, right here, right now." It was a theatrical flourish, a show of dominance. He wanted to demonstrate liquidity and benevolence in one stroke. He pulled a black titanium corporate card from his pocket. It was the Northcrest Founders Card. My card. The one he had reissued in his name the week I was sentenced. "Silas," I said sharply. "Executing writ of attachment," Silas said. He pressed the key. "Federal hold is active. All accounts associated with the Brooks Family Trust and Northcrest Corporate Treasury are now frozen. Timestamp, 7:42 p.m. On screen. Gavin smiled at the camera. He tapped the card against the terminal with a flourish. "Beep!" A harsh, dissonant tone echoed through the speaker system. The large screen behind Gavin, which was mirroring the transaction for the audience to see, flashed a red box. "Declined?" Gavin blinked. The smile didn't leave his face, but it froze around the edges. He let out a small, self-deprecating chuckle. Technology," he joked, winking at the crowd. "Even the best systems have a hiccup. Let's try the chip." He inserted the card into the slot. The audience chuckled politely. It was a relatable moment, a funny little glitch. I watched closely. I wasn't looking at Gavin. I was looking at Marcus Sterling, the CEO of Omnicorp. He wasn't laughing. He was frowning slightly, his eyes darting to his CFO standing in the wings. Gavin waited. The terminal processed. "Beep! Transaction declined. Code 05. Do not honor." The laughter in the room died instantly. Gavin pulled the card out, staring at it as if it had betrayed him. A bead of sweat appeared on his forehead, glistening under the stage lights. "Apologies," Gavin said, his voice a little higher than before. "Must be a security hold. We are moving a lot of money today, right?" He laughed again. Nobody joined him. "Try it again, Gavin," I whispered to the screen. "Do it." "He is going to try a different card," Ronan predicted. On cue, Gavin reached into his wallet. He pulled out his personal platinum card. "Let's use the personal account. My treat." He swiped. Beep! Declined. A murmur rippled through the ballroom. It started in the back and rolled forward like a wave. 2,000 people were suddenly whispering. Is that normal?" I heard a voice on the live feed ask. Then the phone started. It began with a few screens lighting up in the darkened audience, then 10, then 50. A sea of blue light illuminated the faces of the investors and journalists. "The notification just hit the wires," Silas said, reading from his monitor. "Bloomberg terminal is flashing red. Northcrest Vault assets frozen by federal court order. Trading halted." On stage, Gavin was wiping his hands on his tuxedo pants. He looked small. He looked around for an aide, for a handler, for anyone to save him. "Mr. Sterling?" Gavin said, turning to the Omnicorp CEO. Marcus, I am sure this is just a clerical error. Marcus Sterling took a step back. It was a small movement, but it was a chasm. He pulled his phone from his pocket, looked at the screen, and his face went ashen. He whispered something to my father. My father stood up, his face purple. He began frantically tapping his own phone. Then the twist happened. Focus on the front row, third seat left, I told Silas. Is that? It is the Bear Trap, Silas confirmed. Financial live streamer, 2 million subscribers. A young man in a hoodie, who had somehow gotten a press pass, was standing up. He held his phone high, live streaming directly to Twitch and Twitter. We could hear his commentary on the secondary audio feed. Guys, are you seeing this? The streamer shouted, his voice cutting through the murmurs. Gavin Brooks just got declined 3 times on stage, and I am looking at a court filing that just dropped. Allegations of massive embezzlement and fraud. The Brooks family accounts are zeroed out. This is Enron live on camera. Gavin heard him. He looked at the streamer, his eyes wide with terror. Security! Gavin shouted, his voice cracking. Get him out of here! But security didn't move. They were listening to their earpieces. They were likely being told that the checks for the event were bouncing. Gavin's phone, sitting on the podium, began to ring. It was amplified by the microphone he was still wearing. The ringtone was loud, jarring. He stared at it. He knew he shouldn't answer it, but instinct took over. He needed an answer. He needed someone to tell him this was a mistake. He picked it up. Hello? Fix this. The voice on the other end was audible through the stage mic. It was the Northcrest Chief Compliance Officer, a man I had hired myself years ago. Mr. Brooks, the voice said, tinny but clear. We have federal marshals in the lobby. They have a warrant. Every account is locked. The bank is alleging a Ponzi scheme structure involving the Cayman accounts. They are seizing the building. Gavin dropped the phone. It clattered against the podium, a sound that echoed like a gavel strike. He looked out at the audience. The investors were not looking at him anymore. They were rushing for the exits, dialing their brokers, trying to dump their positions before the stock hit zero. Marcus Sterling was already gone, flanked by his security team, distancing himself from the blast radius. My parents were standing there, frozen. My mother was clutching my father's arm, looking around wildly, realizing that the social standing she worshipped was evaporating into thin air. Gavin stood alone on the stage, the New Era logo shining ironically behind him. He looked like a ghost. In the safe house, the silence was heavy. I looked down at my notepad. I had written 3 times. 7:42 p.m. Attempt 1. 7:43 p.m. Attempt 2. 7:44 p.m. Attempt 3. Why are you logging the times? Ronan asked quietly. In TAT, I said, capping my pen. He knew the company was under audit. He knew there were liquidity issues, but he stood on that stage and attempted to authorize a transaction. He attempted to sign a merger deal, knowing he might not have the funds. That is not just negligence. That is active fraud. That is wire fraud. That is attempting to defraud a charity. I stood up and walked to the screen. I looked at Gavin's terrified face. 3 years, I said softly. I sat in a cell for 3 years because they said I was dangerous. They said I was out of control. I touched the glass, right over his image. They used the court to lock me out, I said, turning to Ronan. Now, I am using the court to lock them in. The stock is in free fall, Silas reported. Down 40% in 3 minutes. Trading curbs are kicking in. The board is calling an emergency meeting. Let it burn, I said. We don't want the company at $40 a share. We want it at $4. We are buying it back with the money they couldn't steal. Ronan nodded. The police will be looking for you. Haley, they will want a statement. Not yet, I said. This was just the opening act. Gavin is humiliated, but he is not finished. He will try to blame Noah. He will try to say he was hacked. I looked at the live stream, where the blogger was now zooming in on my father shouting at a waiter. We need the final nail, I said. We need to prove the miscarriage. We need to show the world that the body count wasn't accidental. I picked up my jacket. Get the car, I told Ronan. We are going to the hospital. The hospital? Ronan asked. Why? Because while everyone is watching the money, I said, we are going to go get the medical records before my mother remembers she needs to shred them. I looked back at the screen one last time. Gavin was being led off stage by two men in suits. They weren't his security. They were federal agents. Happy anniversary, Gavin, I whispered. Welcome to the system. The document that broke the back of the Brooks family defense did not come with a shout. It arrived with a silent, digital ping on the electronic docket of the Denver District Court. It was 9 a.m, the day after Gavin's humiliation in Dallas. While the financial news channels were still dissecting the freezing of the company assets, Ronan filed a supplementary motion titled Exhibit G, Authenticated Medical History of Marissa Brooks Miller. I sat in the safe house, a cup of tea untouched on the table, watching the news feed on the main monitor. The anchor, a woman who had once called me the Ice Queen of Tech, looked pale as she read the breaking update. We are receiving reports of a new filing in the Brooks case, she said, tapping her earpiece. It appears to be a medical record from the Aspen Valley Women's Health Clinic. It is dated October 14th. That is 19 days before the accident that allegedly caused Marissa Brooks Miller's miscarriage. The screen flashed a redacted image of the document. There it was, the truth, typed in black ink. Diagnosis: spontaneous abortion, miscarriage. Complete, date of procedure, October 14th. Patient signature: Marissa Brooks Miller. Physician, note: patient advised to rest due to emotional distress. Recommended grief counseling. The silence in the room was heavy. This was not just a lie. This was a desecration. My family had stood in a courtroom, wearing black, weeping for a child they knew was already gone. They had let a prosecutor hold up a sonogram photo of a fetus that had ceased to exist 3 weeks before I ever got behind the wheel of that car. They had turned a private tragedy into a weapon of mass destruction to take me down. It is out, Ronan said, his voice grim. The district attorney just scheduled a press conference. He cannot ignore this. This is fraud on the court. It is perjury. They blamed me, I whispered, for killing a baby that was already dead. They needed a victim, Ronan said. A financial dispute is boring. A dead baby? That makes you a monster. That gets you 3 years. Show me the house, I said. Silas nodded. He typed a command into his console. Noah had provided us with more than just financial records. He had given us access to the security upgrades Gavin had installed in the family estate. Cameras and microphones designed to watch the staff, now turned inward on their masters. The large monitor flickered and changed to a view of my parents' living room. It was a scene of devastation. My mother was sitting on the sofa, clutching a throw pillow, sobbing hysterically. My father was pacing by the fireplace, a glass of scotch in his hand, even though it was not yet noon. But the real drama was happening in the foyer. Gavin had just returned from Dallas. He looked like a man who had not slept in 48 hours. His tuxedo shirt was unbuttoned, his tie gone, his face unshaven and gray. He stormed into the living room, throwing his suitcase against the wall. Marissa was sitting in the armchair by the window. She was not crying. She was reading a magazine. You, Gavin rasped, pointing a shaking finger at his wife. You told me the crash caused it. Marissa lowered the magazine. Her face was a mask of porcelain indifference. Keep your voice down, Gavin. The neighbors are already watching from the lawn. The filing, Gavin shouted, ignoring her. My lawyer just called. They have the records from Aspen. You lost the baby in October. You lied to me. You let me stand up in court and swear that Haley killed our child. Marissa closed the magazine and placed it on the side table. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. She looked small, but in that moment, she was the most terrifying person in the room. I didn't lie to you, Gavin, she said calmly. I gave you exactly what you needed. You let me commit perjury. I let you become CEO, Marissa corrected, her voice ice cold. You were drowning in debt. Haley was going to audit the books. You needed her gone. You needed her stripped of her shares and her power. If I had just told you I miscarried, what would you have done? You would have cried. You would have been weak. She took a step toward him. So I saved the news, she said. I waited for an opportunity, and when Haley drove me that day, when she started lecturing me about money, I saw a way to solve all our problems at once. Gavin stared at her, horror dawning on his face. You grabbed the wheel. I took a calculated risk, Marissa said. I knew the car was safe. I knew Haley was a good driver. I didn't want to die. I just needed an accident. I needed a reason to blame her for the loss. And it worked, didn't it? You got the company. You got the money to pay off your bookies. You got to play the grieving father. You are a psychopath, Gavin whispered, backing away. I am a partner, Marissa snapped. And don't act like you are innocent. You knew the dashcam would show I grabbed the wheel. You knew it. I thought it was broken, Gavin yelled. The tech said it was broken. Marissa laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. Oh, Gavin, you really are useless, aren't you? She walked over to the fireplace and looked at my father, who had stopped pacing and was staring at her with his mouth open. The tech didn't say it was broken, Marissa said. The tech asked for $50,000 to make sure it was broken, and who do you think paid him? Gavin looked at his wife, then at his father. Who paid him? Gavin asked. Marissa turned back to Gavin. Check the accounts. Darling, check the payments from Rosewood Consulting. That is the shell company your mother uses for her charitable expenses. My mother let out a wail. I didn't know. Marissa told me it was for a private investigator. She said she needed to protect the family privacy. You paid a tech to destroy evidence, Gavin said, his voice trembling. Mom paid him? We all played our parts, Marissa said, picking up her purse. I provided the tragedy, Mom provided the funding, Dad provided the outrage, and you? You just took the money. She walked toward the door. Where are you going? Gavin shouted. To a hotel, Marissa said without looking back, and then to a lawyer, because unlike you, I know when a ship is sinking, and I intend to be the first one on the lifeboat. The front door slammed. On the screen, Gavin collapsed onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. My father threw his glass into the fireplace, shattering it. My mother just rocked back and forth, weeping. I signaled Silas to cut the feed. I felt cold. I had suspected they were monsters, but I had underestimated the depth of their depravity. They hadn't just framed me. They had collaborated on it. My mother funding the cover-up, Marissa orchestrating the crash, Gavin profiting from the lie. My phone began to ring. It was my father, then my mother, then Gavin. The screen lit up with their names, over and over again, Mom calling, Dad calling, Gavin calling. They weren't calling to scold me anymore. They weren't calling to demand I sign over shares. They were calling because for the first time in 3 years, the power dynamic had completely inverted. They were terrified. They knew I had the records. They knew I had the money, and they knew I was watching them burn. I let it ring. Ms. Brooks, Ronan said, the press is gathering outside the safe house. They know you are in Denver. You need to make a statement. I stood up. Not a press conference. I don't want to answer questions. Just a statement. I will set it up, Ronan said. 30 minutes later, I stood on the balcony of the penthouse. The wind was cold, whipping my hair across my face. Below, a cluster of cameras was pointed up at me from the street. I looked into the lens of the news drone hovering nearby. My name is Haley Brooks, I said, my voice steady, carried by the microphone clipped to my lapel. For 1,096 days, I was told that I was a criminal. I was told that I destroyed my family. Today, the world knows that the only thing I destroyed was a lie. I paused, letting the words settle. I have formally requested an independent forensic audit of Northcrest Vault. I have requested a federal investigation into the financial activities of the current board. My priority is the protection of the employees and the integrity of the data we secure. I looked directly into the camera, knowing my parents were watching. To those who think they can hide behind family loyalty or shell companies, the truth does not care about your last name. The truth follows a process, and that process has just begun. I turned and walked back inside, sliding the glass door shut. It was done. The first domino had fallen, and it had crushed them. Ronan handed me my secure phone. "You have a message." I looked at the screen. It was from Noah. Subject: the last piece. Text: "You broke their defense. Now let's break their alibi. I am coming over. I am bringing the server logs from the night of the crash. Not just the money, the geolocation data. It proves Dad wasn't at home grieving while you were being booked. He was at the precinct, meeting with the arresting officer in the parking lot." I stared at the message. My father, the pillar of the community. He hadn't just paid for a lawyer, he had met with the police. "I am bringing it tonight," Noah wrote. "This is the thing that makes the judge sign the arrest warrants. Be ready." I looked at Ronan. "Noah is coming," I said, "and he is bringing the end of the story." "Then we wait," Ronan said. But as I looked out at the city lights, a strange feeling settled in my stomach. It was too easy. Marissa walking out, Gavin collapsing, the parents panicking. They were cornered rats. And cornered rats do not just surrender, they bite. "Silas," I said sharply, "check the tracker on Noah's car." Silas typed quickly. "He is moving, heading this way. He is on the I-25 corridor." "Good," I said. But I kept my hand on the phone, watching the dot move on the map. Tonight, the balance had shifted. But until Noah walked through that door with the final drive, the game was not over. "Come on, Noah," I whispered. "Bring it home." The convoy of black SUVs rolled into the cul-de-sac of Cherry Creek at exactly 10 o'clock at night. It was a calculated arrival time, late enough to be intrusive, early enough for the 11 o'clock news. This house, a sprawling 6-bedroom estate with a manicured lawn and a fountain that cost more than most people earned in a year, was the symbol of the Brooks family success. But that was a lie, too. The deed did not belong to Robert and Diane Brooks. It did not belong to the family trust. It belonged to me. I had bought this house 5 years ago with the first major dividend from North Crest. I had allowed my parents to live there rent-free because I was the dutiful daughter. I had allowed Gavin to crash in the guest wing because I was the supportive sister. When they sent me to prison, they simply changed the locks and acted as if they owned the bricks. Tonight, the landlord was returning. I stepped out of the car. The air was crisp, biting. The street was already lined with neighbors standing on their porches, phones raised, whispering behind hands. Ronan had tipped off the press, and the paparazzi were kept at the perimeter of the driveway by private security, their flashes popping like distant lightning. Ronan walked beside me, carrying a thin blue folder. Behind us came 4 uniformed movers and 2 off-duty police officers we had hired for civil standby. We walked up the stone path. I remembered walking this path for Sunday dinners, dreading the criticism. I remembered walking it the day of the arrest. Ronan rang the doorbell. One long, sustained press. The door opened. It was my father. He was wearing a smoking jacket, holding a glass of amber liquid. He looked at me, then at the police, then at the movers. His face went from confusion to purple rage in 2 seconds. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice slurring slightly. "Get off my property. You have done enough damage. Haley." "It is not your property, Robert," I said. I did not call him Dad. "And we are not here to visit. We are here to evict." Ronan stepped forward, handing him the paper. "Notice to quit. Immediate execution based on the violation of the asset freeze and the fraudulent use of the homeowner's equity line of credit. The judge signed it an hour ago. You have 30 minutes to vacate." 30 minutes, my father sputtered, backing into the foyer. "This is my house. I have rights, squatters' rights, tenants' rights." "You are not a tenant," Ronan said calmly, stepping into the hallway. You are a guest whose invitation has been revoked due to criminal misconduct occurring on the premises. Specifically, the destruction of evidence paid for from this IP address. We walked in. The house smelled of expensive candles and fear. My mother came running from the living room, her face blotchy from crying. Gavin followed her. He looked wretched. The arrogance from the stage in Dallas was gone, replaced by the cornered ferocity of a wild animal. "You cannot do this! Haley!" my mother screamed. She reached out to grab my arm, but one of the private security guards stepped between us. "It is the middle of the night. Where will we go?" "I hear the Motel 6 on Colfax has vacancies," I said, looking around the foyer. "It is affordable. You might want to save your cash." "You bitch," Gavin spat. "You vindictive, heartless bitch. You have the company back. You froze the accounts. Why do you have to take the roof over our heads?" "Because you bought the roof with my money," I said. "And because I want you to feel what it is like to be displaced, to have a uniform tell you that your life no longer belongs to you." I turned to the movers. "Start with the living room," I instructed. "Anything that was purchased after the date of my incarceration is technically proceeds of crime. It stays. Anything purchased with a company card stays. They can take clothing, toiletries, and personal documents. Nothing else." "You are stealing our things," my mother wailed. "No," Ronan corrected. "We are securing evidence." The scene that followed was a dissection. My mother tried to pack a silver tea set into a suitcase. "Leave it," I said, standing in the doorway. "That was bought with the Q3 bonus from 2 years ago, company property." She dropped it, the metal clanging against the floor. She looked at me with eyes I had never seen before. They were not the eyes of a mother. They were the eyes of a woman realizing her entire identity was a facade I had just shattered. "Please, Haley," she begged, falling to her knees on the Persian rug. "Please, I am your mother. I carried you. Don't humiliate us like this. Look at the window. The neighbors are watching." "Let them watch," I said coldly. "They watched when the police dragged me out in handcuffs because you lied to them. You didn't care about my humiliation then." My father stood by the fireplace, gripping the mantel. He wasn't begging. He was frozen in a state of catatonic denial. He couldn't process that the power he had wielded over me for 34 years was gone. He was just an old man in a borrowed house with a frozen bank account. Gavin was the most volatile. He was throwing clothes into a duffel bag, cursing, kicking the furniture. "I will kill you," he muttered. "I swear to God. Haley, I will find a way." "You couldn't even kill a merger deal." "Gavin," I said, "I don't think you have the capacity for murder, just manslaughter." He froze. He looked at me, and for the first time, he realized that I knew about the previous miscarriage. I knew everything. "Get out," I said. "Time is up." They were dragging their suitcases toward the door, a pathetic parade of fallen aristocracy. The movers were already tagging the furniture with inventory stickers. Then, the front door opened again. The wind blew in, carrying the sound of the clicking cameras. Noah walked in. He was wearing a dark hooded sweatshirt and jeans. He carried a heavy leather satchel over his shoulder. He did not look at me. He looked at them. "Noah!" my mother cried, seeing a lifeline. "Noah, thank God. Tell her. Tell your sister she is crazy. Help us with the bags." Noah didn't move. He walked past my mother as if she were a ghost. He walked past Gavin, who reached out to grab his shoulder. Noah shrugged him off with a violent jerk. He walked to the center of the room and dropped the leather satchel onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy, dull thud. He unbuckled it. He pulled out a thick stack of papers, bound with rubber bands. He pulled out a hard drive. He pulled out a printed timeline that stretched 3 feet long. "I am not helping you with the bags," Noah said. His voice was quiet, but in the silence of the house, it sounded like a shout. "Noah?" my father whispered. "What are you doing?" "I am finishing it," Noah said. He tapped the stack of papers. "This is the communication log," Noah said, looking at Gavin. "Every text message you sent to your bookie, Every email you sent to Mom asking for money to pay off the consultant who wiped the car drive. I pulled them from the family server backups you thought were encrypted. They weren't. He turned to my mother. This is the bank transfer history, he said, pointing to another stack. Traceable payments from your personal account to the technician, and to the doctor in Aspen who falsified the date on Marissa's medical file. He turned to my father. And this, Noah said, his voice shaking slightly, is the GPS data from your phone. Dad, the night of the accident, you weren't at the hospital comforting Marissa. You were in the parking lot of the 4th Precinct, meeting with the shift sergeant. I don't know what you paid him or what you promised him, but that is when the mental instability narrative appeared in the police report. My father sank onto the sofa, his legs giving out. You were spying on us? Gavin whispered. You are my brother. I am an actuary, Noah said, tears finally welling in his eyes. I deal in facts, I deal in risk, and for 3 years, I have watched you people gamble with Haley's life like it was a poker chip. He looked at me then. I didn't do it for Haley because she is my sister, Noah said, addressing the room but looking at me. I did it because she was the only one actually doing the work, the only one who didn't steal, the only one who didn't lie. He looked back at our parents. I don't stand on a side, Noah said, his voice breaking. I stand with the truth, and the truth is that this family sold its soul to steal a company. You didn't just break the law, you broke us. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother wasn't crying anymore. She was staring at Noah as if he had pulled a knife on her. The betrayal from the quiet one, the one they ignored, was the cut that finally bled them dry. Noah, my mother whispered, how could you? Because you taught me to count, Noah said, wiping his face with his sleeve. And nothing you did added up. He pushed the pile of evidence toward Ronan. It is all there, Noah said. Cloud verified, time-stamped, admissible. Ronan picked up the file. Thank you. Mr. Brooks? I looked at my family. They were decimated. The last pillar of their defense, their unity, had just crumbled in front of the fireplace. Go, I said. They didn't argue. They couldn't. They picked up their bags, heads low, and walked toward the door. I followed them out. I stood on the front porch. The flashbulbs went wild. The reporters shouted questions. Mr. Brooks, is it true you are being evicted? Gavin, what about the fraud charges? Haley, is this revenge? My parents and Gavin had to walk through the gauntlet. They had to push through the wall of cameras to get to the Uber that was waiting for them at the curb because we had seized the family cars. They looked small. They looked old. They looked like criminals. I stood on the top step, looking down at them. I didn't smile. I didn't feel joy. I felt a cold, clean emptiness. It was the feeling of a tumor being removed. Noah stepped up beside me. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, shoulder to shoulder. You okay? He asked quietly. I am fine, I said. I watched the taillights of the Uber fade down the street. They used this house to hide, I said. They used the court to bind me. I turned to go back inside, back to the evidence that would send them away for a very long time. Tonight, they sleep in a motel, I said to Noah. Tomorrow, the knot will be untied, in the exact same place where they tied me up. The courthouse, Noah said. The courthouse, I agreed. And this time, I am bringing the hammer. The courtroom was the same. The smell of lemon polish and old anxiety was the same. The judge, Honorable Justice Harrison, was the same man who had sentenced me to prison 3 years ago, but everything else had changed. I sat at the plaintiff's table, not as a defendant in a jumpsuit, but as the accuser in a midnight blue suit that cost more than my brother's car. Ronan Hale stood beside me, a shark smelling blood in the water. On the other side of the aisle, my family sat huddled with a team of expensive lawyers who looked visibly nervous. They knew what we had filed. They knew the storm was not coming. It was already here. All rise, the bailiff bellowed. Judge Harrison took his seat. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had read the emergency motions on his desk and realized he had been made a fool of in his own courtroom. "We are here on an emergency evidentiary hearing regarding the conviction of Haley Brooks," Judge Harrison said, peering over his spectacles. "Mr. Hale, you have made some explosive allegations regarding perjury, fraud, and evidence tampering. You may proceed." Ronan stood up. He buttoned his jacket with a slow, deliberate movement. "Your Honor," Ronan began, his voice filling the room. 3 years ago, this court was told a tragic story about a reckless woman who killed her unborn nephew in a fit of jealousy. Today, we will prove that the only thing reckless in this room was the greed of the people sitting at that defense table, and we will prove that the only thing that died that day was the truth. Ronan signaled to the clerk. "Exhibit A," Ronan said. "The financial records of Northcrest Vault. We have traced over $4 million in unauthorized withdrawals made by Gavin Brooks and concealed through shell companies. This establishes the motive. They needed Haley Brooks removed because she was the only one standing between them and a federal embezzlement charge." Gavin jumped up. "That is a lie. Those were business expenses." "Sit down, Mr. Brooks," the judge roared. Ronan didn't even blink. Exhibit B, the medical records from Aspen Valley Women's Health. The screens in the courtroom flickered to life. The document regarding Marissa's prior miscarriage appeared, magnified for everyone to see. "The prosecution claimed my client caused the death of a fetus during the crash," Ronan said, pointing at the screen. "But as you can see, the pregnancy had terminated naturally 19 days prior. The family knew. Marissa Brooks Miller knew. Yet they stood in this courtroom, wearing black, and swore under oath that my client was a killer." I looked at Marissa. She was staring at the table, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. "We call Marissa Brooks Miller to the stand," Ronan announced. Marissa stood up. Her lawyer grabbed her arm, whispering frantically, but she shook him off. She walked to the witness box. She looked at Gavin, then at her in-laws. She saw the ship going down, and Marissa was a survivor. "Mrs. Miller," Ronan asked, "did you lie to this court 3 years ago?" The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I testified to what I was told was necessary," Marissa said, her voice shaking. "Did you tell your husband, Gavin Brooks, that you had already lost the baby before the accident?" "Yes," Marissa whispered. "And what did he say?" Marissa took a deep breath. He said we could use it. He said if we blamed the crash, the insurance payout would be higher, and he said it would be the perfect way to get Haley out of the company so he could cover his debts." "Liar," my mother screamed from the gallery. "You lying witch." The gavel banged like a gunshot. "Order! One more outburst and I will clear this court." Ronan turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we have established motive and perjury. Now, let us address the evidence that convicted my client. The broken camera." Ronan turned to the back of the room. 2 marshals opened the doors. Dr. Eris Thorne, the expert witness who had testified against me, walked in. He was not in a suit this time. He was in handcuffs, escorted by federal agents. "Dr. Thorne has been in custody since 6 this morning," Ronan said. "He has agreed to a plea deal." Ronan looked at the man. "Dr. Thorne, was the drive in Haley Brooks' car actually broken?" Thorne looked at the floor. "No." "Why did you testify that it was?" "I was paid $50,000 to magnetically wipe it and declare it corrupt," Thorne mumbled. "Who paid you?" Thorne looked up, his eyes landing on my mother. "Diane Brooks. The transfer came from Rosewood Consulting." My father put his head in his hands. My mother just stared forward, her face a mask of shock, as if she couldn't believe her money hadn't bought her silence. "But we have one final piece of evidence, Your Honor," Ronan said. "The one thing they couldn't wipe." Noah stood up from the bench behind me. He walked forward and handed a flash drive to the bailiff. "This is the server log from the Northcrest internal system," Ronan explained. "It shows the geolocation and activity of every administrative login." Ronan turned to face Gavin directly. "Mr. Brooks claimed he was at the hospital, grieving, while the car was being impounded, but these logs show that at 7:42 in the evening, 20 minutes after the crash, an administrative override was executed on the cloud backup of the vehicle. The screen changed. It showed a map. A blue dot was pulsing right next to the crash site on the highway. The command to delete the footage wasn't sent from a glitch, Ronan said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. It was sent from a mobile device registered to Gavin Brooks. He wasn't at the hospital. He logged in remotely, from his phone. While the ambulance was still loading his wife, he didn't check on her. He checked on the data, and he deleted it. Gavin's face went white. He stood up, knocking his chair over. I was trying to protect the company, Gavin stammered. I thought the footage would look bad. You tampered with evidence in a felony investigation, the judge shouted, his face turning red. The district attorney, the man who had put me in prison, stood up. He looked furious. He realized he had been played for a fool by a family of con artists. Your Honor, the DA said, his voice tight. The state moves to dismiss all charges against Haley Brooks with prejudice. Furthermore, based on the testimony and evidence presented here, we are requesting the immediate arrest of Gavin Brooks, Robert Brooks, and Diane Brooks for conspiracy, perjury, obstruction of justice, and wire fraud. Granted. Judge Harrison slammed the gavel. Marshals, take them into custody. The courtroom erupted. Gavin tried to run. He actually turned toward the side door, but two marshals were on him in a second. They slammed him against the defense table, twisting his arms behind his back. Get off me, Gavin screamed. I am the CEO. You can't touch me. You are nothing, I said, speaking for the first time. Gavin looked up at me, his cheek pressed against the wood table. The handcuffs clicked, a sharp, metallic sound that echoed the sound of my own arrest 3 years ago. My parents were being cuffed in the gallery. My mother was sobbing, begging the officers to let her fix her hair. My father was silent, looking at me with dead eyes, realizing that the empire he thought he was saving was gone forever. Judge Harrison looked at me. His expression softened. Ms. Brooks, he said, this court failed you. I failed you. The sentence is vacated immediately. Your record is expunged. An order is hereby issued restoring your full ownership and control of Northcrest Vault. You are free to go. I stood up. I looked at Gavin one last time as they dragged him out. He was weeping now, broken and small. Thank you, Your Honor, I said. I turned and walked down the aisle. I walked past Noah. He didn't smile, but he gave me a small nod. He had done his job. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the courtroom. The hallway was packed with reporters. The flashbulbs were blinding, a sea of white light. Haley, how does it feel? What will you do with the company? Will you forgive your family? I stopped at the top of the courthouse steps. The sun was shining, bright and clear. I took a deep breath of the free air. It tasted sweeter than it ever had before. I looked directly into the bank of cameras. I saw the red tally lights blinking. I knew the world was watching. They used a lie to steal my past, I said, my voice steady and strong. They used my loyalty to try and steal my future, but the truth has a way of compounding interest. I adjusted my jacket, looking out at the city skyline where my building stood waiting for me. Hate is a heavy burden, I said. I am putting it down right here, today. I am not a victim. I am not a prisoner. I am the CEO, and I have a company to run. I walked down the steps, the click of my heels on the pavement sounding like the ticking of a clock that had finally been reset. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Please leave a comment down below with your location, and let me know what you thought of Haley's revenge. Was it satisfying? Would you have done anything differently? If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of karma and retribution, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories. Don't forget to hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people. Your support means the world to me and helps me bring more of these dramatic stories to life. Stay safe. And remember, the truth always wins.